During high school, I had depression. Most of it was brought about by religion. I had been raised on the idea that suffering was something God wanted, and that there was something that was wrong with me because I could not feel the love of God like so many around me appeared to feel. Because of this, I felt helpless about the plight of billions of people on the planet who were going to burn in hell for all of eternity. During this depression, I had little regard for my own life or livelihood, and I many times asked God to take my life, as I could not take my own without ending up in hell. On top of this, I also had no social skills, as I had both Asperger's, and I spent most of my childhood in an isolationistically homeschooled until my sophomore year. I took to heart, be in the world but not of the world, meaning I stayed away from anything considered sin, which is pretty much the definition of adolescents trying to understand life. So not even people in my church could relate to me or wanted to really understand me. On top of this, I was also way too smart and too much of an outside-the-box thinker for religion, but I didn't know that until years later. I worked about 40 hours a week to pay for college, and both because of my new freedom and my fatigue from working so much, I ended up sleeping in and skipping classes. The depression led me to dropping out of college my second semester of college, leaving me with about a .5 GPA. I spent the next summer isolated in my room, going to work and being a nuisance and a drag on the family. Then my hours got cut and I wrecked my truck, partially because of my lack of care of my own life. At that point, my mother gave me two choices, leave or join the military. I chose the latter and ended up entering the nuclear navy in boot camp. As I still had no social skills, I still had depression, but I felt I had no choice but to go on, even though I felt my life was even more horrible than it had ever been now that I was in boot camp and I had no control over my life thanks to the Navy. The feeling of pride I got on that rare occasion helped a bit and helped me keep on. After a year and a half of training, I finally left for my ship. It was there that I began to see the rest of the world. I visited countries like Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, which, although they were countries that liked us, they were still oppressive and were giant, hot, and muggy sandboxes. It was during this time that I realized just how good I had it in the U.S. It was also during this time that I began reading the Bible in the mindset of someone from the Middle East, as this was the area it was written in. And it completely changed into a different book. It became a book of cynicism, desperation, and fear. And this was just the Gospels. It became a very dark book, and unlike the happy glasses I wore within the protected Midwest, the good news no longer seemed so good. The Bible was written from a mindset of culturally enslaved, dirt-poor people whom I would never really be able to relate to. I realized that no matter what I read in the Bible, I would never be able to get the true meaning of what it was they were trying to get across. Not only just from experience context, but also from cultural context, as I found later on that when Jesus is discussing divorce, the wording used makes it sound as if he's completely against any divorce in terms of a woman divorcing her husband, which Christians seem to hold really near and dear, but they seem okay with it. As it turns out, a professor of ancient legal law realized the phrase used by Jesus was not against any divorce, but it referred to a divorce clause of that area that would allow women to get a divorce for reasons including abuse and even infertility. From these examples, I realized that no one in this time period, our time period, especially not us in the protected Midwest, would ever really understand anything the people were writing in the Bible actually meant to say and why they said it. After this, I looked on life with a much more open mind. I then went on to Portugal and Europe and realized that a different mindset could exist, one where sex was considered normal and not idealized or vilified, and people seemed happy without talking about God and religion all the time. As I progressed, I began to see that I did not need to be depressed all the time. However, my brain was still addicted to the depression drug, and it was difficult to let go of that drug, as I had been a slave for nearly all my teenage life. I began seeing a military shrink who was oddly also a liberal-minded nun. From her, I learned self-hypnosis, and I began moving my subconscious around to better fit reality so that I could enjoy what I had and learn to think more correctly about the world around me. I still had lingering depression and moved to a point where I would only get depression about twice a month. Then at the age of 23, I began actually studying science in college and realized, thanks to my training in the nuclear field, that because of chaos theory, evolution by natural selection was not only a viable theory, but it was also the most likely. From then on, my depression lessened as I knew now that people were probably not going to hell. I now had some hope in the future. I began studying Eastern philosophy such as Buddhism and the Tao Te Ching, which taught me to stop worrying and being addicted to my own brain drugs. I reached a point where I began having some social life, and I began having depression about once a month. At a certain point, I learned a trick that involved lying to myself. People do this all the time in their day-to-day lives. However, I did not do this, and I saw all the horrors of reality around me and gave up hope. I felt better about myself because I could judge others for not doing the same and doing something to fix the problem. However, I was so crippled by the depression of it all that I really wasn't doing anything to fix it either. So I began treating the reality I wanted life to be as a fantasy I could live in, and I lied to myself constantly that my life wasn't so bad. And what's funny is, that became more of a reality. People dislike hanging out with depressing people. It depresses them. I began having some semblance of a social life, and I felt better about my own and the world around me. That was only part of it. I still had bouts of depression, just no longer as bad. After watching the movie A Beautiful Mind, I realized that any neuroses, if well understood, will be suppressed or perhaps completely go away after enough time if just ignored enough, but only after enough therapy and self-awareness. So that's what I did. Anytime I got the urge to feel depressed, I would do just that, ignore it and find something else to distract me with. The number of times I became depressed became less and less to the point that I have probably now gone years with only tiny twinges of depression that lasted a total of a few minutes. The urge to be depressed is still there, lingering in the back of my mind, ready to come out if I ever gave it any encouragement, but for now it knows that I won't give it any attention, so it won't bother. What's funny is, though, that I still have lingering programming from religion. After becoming a non-believer, I began studying our human ancestry, and immediately I felt like I was looking at some vile, sinful material. The guilt I felt like a punch in the gut. I will also still find myself identifying with Christian, or jump to praying in my first thought, and stop myself because I've been so programmed to do so. I know many Christians will say that this is just God's way of telling me I need to return to Him. But as I said in my brainwashing video, Stockholm Syndrome is very strong and will program you to almost miss captivity. Religion has this same effect. So as a mental trick, I began reading human ancestry as a form of fiction, because fiction isn't evil, and my guilt went away. I now can discuss the known human ancestry and evolution with almost no feeling of guilt, as now science and the Bible emotionally have about the same level of reality, with the Bible slowly losing ground. If I keep ignoring that little voice in the back of my mind, bringing up blind and baseless fears until I bombard it with every single piece of evidence I have against it, I will probably be completely clean of religious brainwashing in the next 3 to 5 years, as it took me about the same amount to completely overcome depressionist programming. Thank you.